artist myself. I'm a painter. I've taught and lectured on art history for many years now. Lots of different topics. Sometimes in New York, I concentrated on things that were happening in the city at the Met and MoMA quite often. But I also do series on different topics. Today, the topic is Winslow Homer, a New England artist. And I think, doing the research, I was kind of surprised what I found out about him. I think people think of him mainly as a marine painter of boats and seaside subjects, and mainly as a watercolorist. But there are parts of his history that are quite different and I think very interesting. So I guess we'll get started. All right, so he was born in Boston, 1836. His mother was actually a watercolorist, so he came by this honestly. And when he was quite young, he definitely showed an interest in art, and his father arranged for him to be an apprentice to a lithographer. So he was like an illustrator for newspapers and magazines. And that was really his career for about 20 years. He did move to New York at this time. So let's look, there he is. Some of the influences, he also did make his way to France. And this was a time when the Impressionists were starting to appear and have an impact on the art world. And he saw a lot of these works. So these two painters, Manet and Courbet, are considered realist painters. This was the movement that came right before Impressionism. So their subjects were everyday people, as you see here, doing common labor. This painting, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. It was bombed and destroyed in World War II. Millet's Gleaners, again, sort of elevating everyday workers and the agrarian life to a higher, sort of more noble standing. The Barbizon school actually also came slightly before the Impressionists and was the first school of art where they really worked in plein air, outdoors. A lot of that had to do actually with the technological innovation. And what that was the invention of oil paint in tubes, which happened around the middle of the 19th century. So previous to that, artists would have to take their oils and their pigments and grind them up, and it was like a whole chemistry thing going on. And it was very hard to bring all that out of doors. So the tubes made it much more portable, and we had artists like Daubigny. Turner's another one, a British artist, and of course the sea was his favorite topic, and the power of nature that you see here. So let's continue with Homer. So he did, as I say, work as a commercial illustrator. While he was working for a magazine called Harper's Weekly, they decided to send him to the front of the Civil War, which had just broken out, as sort of their correspondent. Of course, this was a time where photography was just really starting to become, easier, but it still wasn't very common for newspapers and magazines to use photography. So he did these lithographs. And at this point, he really wasn't yet an oil painter or a watercolorist. This one is called The Songs of War. And basically, it's sort of visual representations of various, things to kind of get the spirit of the conflict, both on both sides. So you have Dixie, so that both the North and the South is represented here. This one is called News from the War. So, it's still not really dealing with the conflict itself, but yet the impact it was having on everyday people. And you see the woman in the center there who is receiving a letter with very tragic news, and really getting to the impact that the war had on the everyday person. If you look at the bottom is Homer himself, and it says right underneath it, "Our special artist." So he was right there, with the soldiers, depicting what was happening. So some of them do deal with actual battles, like this one. This is a drawing or lithograph that was later turned into a painting. I'll talk about that a little more when we get to the color version of it. So some of these were done, in just black and white, and then later became paintings when he became more confident as an oil painter. So there's the color version. And as I said, we'll look at that again. This is a surgeon at work in the field. And, some of the really harsh realities and the hardships that were happening, this brutal conflict. Thanksgiving at the front, so, things that were trying to make people feel like, they had some connection to home or to family, and really had a long way to go to do that. And then home from the war, and the joyousness of these reunions. So let's look now at some of the paintings. So here's Sharpshooter. And what this actually deals with another technological invention, and that was this long-distance sight that was used on these rifles. And it allowed someone to act sort of as a sniper and sit in a tree like this and pick off the enemy. The reaction Homer had to this was really he was really appalled by this. He felt that his comment was it was as close to murder as anything he could imagine. And it made me think about the different forms of warfare that have developed over the years, and how it becomes more and more impersonal and distant. And you think of things like aerial warfare and bombings, and now we have drone warfare, and each of them takes us further away from really being face to face with the enemy. So this goes back to this time. And you can see he's dressed in blue, so this is a Union soldier. And of course, Homer was affiliated with the Union. And, here he's sort of bracing himself against the tree. This is called Defiance, and this is showing a Confederate soldier sort of in the last gasp of the war. It's 1864. Sort of daring them to end this. This one's called Prisoners from the Front, and it deals with an actual event. It's a general named, let me get the name here, Francis Channing Barlow, who was a Union general, captured some Confederate soldiers, as you see here. The background here is the battlefield in just Petersburg, Virginia. It's a very important scene from the war. This is called Army Teamsters, and this was something you see. These are black soldiers, and they had a particular place. Obviously it was a time there wasn't a lot of equality going on, but they did serve in the Union Army here. And here they're sort of resting between trips. There's been some criticism that this is sort of implying a sort of laziness, like a stereotype, but I don't think it really fits with other things we know about Homer. This is called Home Sweet Home, and obviously this isn't their home. Home Sweet Home evokes where they're longing to be, but this is their temporary home, of course, and has a sort of irony to it. And this is a very important painting. This is in the Met, actually. The Veteran in a New Field. So this is right after the war. And what we have here is a soldier. You can see over here is some discarded uniform. And he's back working at the previous occupation. This is a wheat field, so we know this is the North because of the wheat. But we also have sort of a symbolism going here. So what he's using is a scythe. A scythe is, has often been meant as a symbol of death. So, you know, it also kind of implies the whole idea of turning swords into plowshares. And this was done right after the end of the war and also the assassination of President Lincoln. You can see some of the brushwork here, very obvious. This is something he probably was influenced by the Impressionists that were working around the same time. This is called Rainy Day in Camp. And, you know, we have just this scene of misery with the mud and you know, you just can feel the dampness and the cold here. So after the war, he did continue illustrating for the magazine. And there was a turn toward much lighter topics, as you see here, bathers at the seashore, a ball in Paris. And there's a cover, Harper's Bazaar, it's called now. So, as I said, after the war, he did turn to some other subjects, but he also addressed what was happening in terms of Reconstruction, which was a really turbulent and very kind of confusing time for the country. So here we have a visit from the old mistress. So we have the former slaves confronting their mistress, as you see, and it's a very uncomfortable scene. It's like people just didn't know where to go, where the future lay at this point. They weren't really sure what their place was in society. The slaves really, you know, as much as they appreciated being free, felt a little bit lost in terms of their next steps in the world. And you can obviously also see the difference in the dress that they're wearing. This is called Near Andersonville, and Andersonville was a very brutal prison. It was for prisoners of war. Many soldiers died there. And again, it's this sort of moment in between dark and light. You know, the uncertainty of the future is really what's being represented. And as I said, he also turned toward some lighter, more, some of the sort of pursuits, leisure pursuits, like this concert here. And he took a lot of influence also from Degas and the sort of viewpoint where you're looking up, sort of exaggerated viewpoints. We'll see that again. This is called Sunday Morning in Virginia. And what we have here are scenes of children. And this is something that he addressed many times through his career. He actually never had a child, he never married. But he was very interested in children, especially as the war ended and they were like the hope of the future. They were starting over. A lot of them, you know, hadn't really lived through the conflict. And he felt very strongly that the key to success for these people was education. So you have here the schoolmistress, again, dressed somewhat, you know, nicer than the children and teaching them to read here. This is called the Cotton Pickers, and again, a kind of irony that's going on between these newly freed slaves doing pretty much the same work that they were doing before that. And as just a comparison with Malays gleaners, I think there's definitely some influence there. This one is called Dressing for the Carnival. Beautiful color in this one, and the carnival is something called Junkanoo. It was a West Indian celebration. So, it was very important for these people that their traditions get carried on, and you can see that happening here. So again, some scenes of everyday life, and as I said, the whole idea of education was a theme that you see quite often in his work. The Little Red Schoolhouse is in the background. This is something that was really becoming a thing of the past, sort of nostalgia for like a simpler time. And here we have Boys in a Pasture. So again, we have children as the focus. And also, it has a very unusual viewpoint. You might call it a worm's eye view. You're down right at the level of the grass here. To me, this brings to mind a famous painting. I thought I had that here. I don't know. I thought it was in here, but it reminds me a lot of Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth, if you can recall that. Being down at the ground level like that. But that brings you closer to the experience that these boys are having, and sort of a nostalgia for a much more innocent time. Here's a seaside scene. This was considered a little bit risque at the time, showing the legs like that. But it's one of the earliest paintings where we see depictions of the sea in his work. And this is a very famous one, Snap the Whip, showing, again, the Little Red Schoolhouse and this children's game. So you're seeing this sort of carefree scene, but it's also showing children working together, cooperating, and achieving a common goal here. Again, we have that very low viewpoint. In around 1880, Homer went to England, and he settled in a little town called Cullercoats, which was a fishing village. And he painted the things he saw there. Now, most of the fishermen were off at sea, so he was depicting their wives, their children that were living really hard, difficult lives. So he really had this affinity for these people, and again, the sea becomes more of a topic for him. So let's look at some of the maritime paintings. So he did actually move to Maine in the early 1880s, a town called Prout's Neck. And that became very influential on his subject matter. So here we have a halibut fisherman, and it looks like a really precarious kind of scene here. The angle of the boat, he's all alone. He's looking back at the larger ship. He's not sure he can get there in these rough seas. The fog's coming in, maybe a storm is coming in. And, it really communicates that power of nature and the uncertainty of these lives of these people. This is quite different. It's also showing a boat at an extreme angle, but somehow it has a much more lighthearted. It's a sunny day. It's a family enjoying time on, I think it's a catboat. And this is called Life Brigade, and A lot of his subjects deal with the rescue efforts that were made when people were, shipwrecked and trying to be rescued. And this, is a very kind of tense scene. We don't really know what the status is of the people on the boat. This one's called The Lifeline. And this is another new invention, something called a breeches buoy, which is a way of transferring people from a shipwreck back to shore using this pulley system. And so we have this man rescuing a woman who looks like she's unconscious. And you can't even see his face because of that red scarf there. And that's really the only color in the whole scene. It's very monochromatic. Again, we have these very turbulent seas, so it looks like a really precarious scene. You can even see, his feet are actually underwater. And you really wonder whether this is going to be successful. This is Dad's Coming. This is actually from a time he spent in Gloucester, Mass, and showing a family waiting for the return of the father. This was actually used as a cover for Harper's Magazine. And it's just showing that moment of waiting. We don't have the father here. But the anticipation is really what you're seeing. And here's an unusual one without people, just the sea and the light on the sea. So he's really becoming very comfortable depicting these maritime scenes. And this is a beautiful one of his better-known paintings called 8 Bells. And that refers to the use of the sextant, and you could see that there. And it's this watch system where there's a strike every 30 minutes. So it's actually, I'm sorry, not a sextant, rather an octant. And so one of them is taking a reading of the sun. And these are very heroic figures. They're very large within the composition. It's not really showing a storm scene, but just sort of the everyday activities. Now this one is very different. It's really showing a very hazardous scene, complete with sharks in the foreground, if you can see them. And we have a black man here on a ship, and it's, again, very precarious, the angle of the boat, the height of the waves, of course the shark, looks like there's blood in the water. And you have this storm cloud in the distance, and he's watching that. Another interesting thing about this painting is what's on the boat, and those little green stalks there are actually sugar cane. This is a reference to the sugar plantations that brought many of the slaves to the New World, and was the heart of the slave industry, really. This painting, when it sold, was for $400. It was the first oil painting he had sold in over 3 years. So he was very disappointed by this. He really wasn't financially successful till fairly late in his life. He was in his 50s or 60s. So he stopped painting in oils for a time after this. So yeah, just to go back to another shark painting, this was done like 100 years earlier by John Singleton Copley. I believe it's in the MFA. The interesting thing about this is that this is based on a true event. This Watson, this young man, did lose his leg in this attack. But the fascinating thing is he later became mayor of London. So it didn't stop him. This is a beautiful view of the sea. And again, one of the paintings he did without human figures, but certainly shows the power of nature and the beauty of nature. And as I said, he did settle in Maine, and here's some of the paintings he did there. And of course, very dramatic and beautiful landscape. You can see how his brushwork, his paint is becoming much thicker, loosely applied, more painterly. And also his use of color is getting much more adept later in his life. So let's turn now to his watercolors, which is something he's really known for. A lot of people think of him mainly as a watercolorist. I think he probably is the leading watercolorist of American painters. I would say John Singer Sargent's up there as well. So here's some of these paintings. And again, we have two little boys carrying the clams. This is again a Gloucester area painting. And again, showing children as the hope for the future. Another one. Beautiful use of the white paper, which is really key to the freshness of a watercolor. And again, we have a woman, it looks sort of precarious, walking on the rocks there. This one continues this theme about elementary education that you see through much of his work. Quite monochromatic. These strange marks on the blackboard have been identified as a method of drawing instruction that was popular in the 1870s, using these different combinations of lines. And he actually signs his name on the blackboard there. And again, showing women doing, this sort of laborious work that is necessary for the fisherman's livelihood. This is one of his late paintings called Fox Hunt, and it's a little hard to see, but the fox who, is foraging for food in the middle of this snowy landscape, very desperate, and these crows that are swooping down on him. So they call this sort of a Darwinian painting, sort of the survival of the fittest, who is going to survive this occurrence here. Now he also started in 1884. He made a lot of winter visits to tropical places and did a lot of watercolors here in the Bahamas. And really very, it's a really logical kind of medium for this kind of landscape. This is Bermuda. And there's a real freshness to these watercolors. It sort of sets them apart from much of his other work. This is a garden in Nassau, and it looks pretty much just like a kind of innocuous, beautiful scene of the tropics, but it's actually showing how these gates are keeping the native population, the black people, out of these fancy estates. And I think I have another one. Yeah, and you can see there's like sort of rocks, sharp rocks at the top of the wall to keep out unwanted visitors. And we have the coral divers. So again, he's turning to this sort of brutal and dangerous work that people sort of at the lower levels of society are doing. And the turtle meat was very popular at this time, so they would collect these turtles for their meat. And again, beautiful use of the paper, the white of the paper, to give that freshness and cleanness to it. And he took up fishing at this time. That was, I think at one point he said he had two loves in his life. One was painting and the other was fishing. So he spent a lot of time. He actually spent a lot of time in Florida, in this place called Homosassa, which was one of his favorite places to fish. So these are some of his very late works. This is called Right and Left. And what we're seeing are these two ducks that are being hunted. We're not sure if they're already shot or if they're like avoiding the bullets. But we're sort of on the same level, eye level, as them, so it kind of brings their predicament very close to us. And we don't know if the gun has actually hit them or not. Another one in Maine. So these were quite late in his life. This was Driftwood, 1909. And I believe that one, let me just go back, that was his final painting. There is a figure here at the bottom. It's a little hard to see looking out, separated from the sea by this little fence there. So this was his studio. It's in Prouts Neck. It's owned by the Portland Museum of Art, and you can tour it. And there's the inside. There he is. And this was a stamp that was done from the painting Breezing Up. So the U.S. honored him in that way. And I think that's where I end. So he didn't really reach financial stability till the year 1900, and he died 10 years later. So it wasn't until he was 64, actually. He's interred in Cambridge in a cemetery there. And as I said, his studio is available to be seen. Very influential to some future painters and illustrators, including the Wyeths, N.C. Wyeth, and his son and grandson. And they actually came to Maine after being inspired by his work. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.